Hello, welcome to On the Bench. I'm your host for this episode, Brendan Sinone, joined per usual by Chris Nee, Zach Blostein. Zach is a little under the weather. This is his Michael Jordan flu game because he literally has the flu. How you feeling, Zach?
I'm feeling much better.
Okay. Hey, Buyer Sinone, sponsored by
The Turner Group.
Buyer Sinone, saying there's a lot of that going around is an old person thing to say.
Very much so. Bye.
I've been saying that because I've been telling people in my bubble, Zach's got it. My best friend out in Washington has it. So there's a lot of that going around. I'm getting old, guys. I'm washed. Buyers to know, and I'm washed.
Bye.
Damn. Speaking of washed, happy belated birthday, Chris.
Bye.
My birthday gift, Zach, was to not wish Chris a happy birthday because I didn't think he would care about such things.
Yeah, that
I was good with it.
You think it was messed up? I think I acknowledged it. I'm like,
really deep down, he wants everyone wants to be wished happy birthday. I'm not saying it's like the most.
I love that Zach thinks there's a deep down in me still.
deep down.
Chris's deep down.
Light don't shine there no more, Zachary.
Chris's deep down is just like a thought bubble of like FSU basketball and porter beers, basically. Fair. All right. So as we get into this episode, we're finally gonna have a little bit of time to do kind of a reflective look at FSU's offseason for football and kind of the strategies behind it, and take inventory of the checklist that we set up, in our opinion, of what we thought we would like to see for FSU to consider a successful offseason. So we'll do a fairly nebulous, certainly totally subjective exercise to evaluate FSU's offseason. And I think it'll be instructive and interesting. That's why we're recording an episode on it. Before we get into that, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors and go into some of the spring sports and things that have started to happen here around Florida State's campus. So shout out to the Turner Group. If you're looking to buy or sell a home in the state of Florida, especially Central Florida, but really throughout the state, Colin, Amy Turner able to help you out and literally get you where you want to go. Super connected, good people, hardworking. They're going to, I was going to say fight. That feels like a little extreme. They will work diligently to get you in the best position possible. What can be a daunting process. So give them a shout. Reach out to me, and I can help you connect with Colin. If you're kind of been on the fence about getting into the housing market, let me know, and we can help you guys test the waters a little bit. And speaking of waters, sometimes you distill the water and you know what it turns into? Bourbon.
Chattanooga whiskey.
Beautiful. Brown nectar of the gods, Chattanooga whiskey. Their rye is awesome. Their 111 proof is a gold standard for craft value bourbons at a higher proof. It is excellent. Their experimental batches are awesome. Everything they do is legitimately good and handcrafted, and a lot of energy and time and care put into the product. It is my favorite craft distillery, and it had been even before they started sponsoring us. So excited to be working with them for another year. Please support people who are supporting us by giving them a try if you haven't already. And if you have and your bottle's running low, you know where to go all throughout the state of Florida, throughout the Southeast, Chattanooga whiskey, everywhere at this point. All right, Chris, a good opening weekend for baseball. A great opening weekend for baseball, about as good as possible, I would say, huh?
Yeah, they started 3-0. Brett was there for every single moment of it, and plenty of them before and after. I was able to see roughly 12 to 15 innings total on the weekend because of some family stuff and other things going on. Pitching looks really good. Defense was pretty high quality. Excellent on the base paths. That's probably an area that FSU has improved so dramatically at over the last 3 years. It's kind of mind-blowing. And the bats were a little quiet in game one, but that certainly got going. I think they ended up belting 17 hits yesterday. They had 4 home runs on Saturday. Yeah, they're a fun bunch. They play at USF on Tuesday, and then they're back here next week in the host Penn.
And the atmosphere was pretty awesome.
Yes, crowds were fantastic. Friday and Saturday, I think we're packed to the gills in the sense of completely confirmed as sellouts, presuming the students came and got their piece, which I know they definitely did on Friday, and I think they did on Saturday too. Sunday was a good Sunday crowd for an early afternoon game on a very nice day in Tallahassee. But yeah, it has an energy. That team is clearly good. It's clearly got Link's fingerprints all over it at this point. They can pitch at a really high level. John Abraham, who came in relief in one of the games, was phenomenal. A guy who noticeably took a step up from last year. Jamie Arnold is, national accolades, and they're all deserved. And both of the other two young men who started, Joey and Wes Mendes, both looked really good too. So, yeah, plenty of confidence to come away from the first weekend at Dick Hauser.
One earned run for the pitching staff through?
I think that's correct. I think they gave up 2 total.
Yeah. All right. So, granted, James Madison, not a baseball powerhouse, but you got to take care of what's on the schedule. Someone pretty cool is in the crowd. So my wife's favorite baseball player, she grew up in New York State, so she liked the Yankees. Her favorite baseball player growing up was Gary Sheffield. And
how old is Gary Sheffield without looking?
49.
56, I believe.
Oh, that hurts a little.
So it was interesting. Like, I remember Gary with like the Yankees, Mets, the Marlins, certainly a few other teams. He ended up playing for like 7 franchises, bounced around a lot in the league. Obviously, super productive and very good career. Hillsborough High product. Shout out 813 Tampa. But yeah, Noah getting up there on Sunday to bat wiggle. It was fun to see. I'd seen it before with preseason and whatnot, and but like, yeah. His dad definitely taught him to swing.
And he has his own cigar line, Gary Sheffield. Just a random aside there. Zach took interest in that. He's like, cigars. Zach's getting into cigars. Pretty cool. Look at my boy growing up. Softball did well as well. Clearwater, was it Clearwater Invitational?
Yeah, they were at the Shriners Children's Clearwater Invitational. FSU's been there every year it's existed. They'll be there again in 26 as the field was announced last night. FSU moved to 8-1 on the season. That only loss being their season opening loss to a very good Oklahoma State team. That team can mash. They can hit at a really high level. Fielding's got to get cleaned up a little bit. They've had some moments at second. They've had some moments in the outfield. Nothing that's overly concerning, but one of those things where you just don't want to give away free outs, especially with like next weekend. They finally open up at home starting on Thursday with Florida A&M. But on Saturday, they play a doubleheader with Texas A&M, who's currently ranked around 5. FSU's around 6. This week, they'll both be around 8 to 9 at worst for the two of them. FSU will probably move up a little bit. A&M slide a little bit. So really, really good matchup at the Plex. I think fans are going to turn out, especially if the weather's decent. And it's going to be a nice big weekend, another big test. They've had a few good tests already. Lonnie doesn't play a soft schedule, never has, certainly isn't this year. But A&M for 2 on Saturday should be a nice little litmus test of where they are about 13, 14 games in.
And then finally, before we get into our in-depth football conversation here, there was a special guest at the Tuck this weekend.
Yeah, FSU basketball only scored like 46 points, so we're not going to talk a whole lot about hoops because that game was dreadfully awful. It's kind of mind-blowing. Clemson's a pretty good basketball team. They remind me, honestly, a little bit of like FSU in 19, where they're a group that plays well together, and they're going to have some success into the postseason because they know what they are and they know how to play at a high level. It was funny, FSU took away Chase Hunter, who's probably Clemson's best player. Didn't matter. Everybody else for Clemson played at a high level. And FSU got blown out. But yeah, Luke Laux, who's certainly a coaching candidate. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying the coaching candidate, but he's pretty close to it.
I mean, he was chilling with Michael out. Like that's
he was up in Michael Alford's box suite, hanging out with him, talking with him and a few other people. He was here because it's NBA All-Star Weekend. He works for the Sacramento Kings currently. Yeah, I think Laux is probably,
The All-Star Weekend was in Tallahassee?
No, but that freedom to come to Tallahassee.
Oh.
All-Star Weekend, I believe, was in Atlanta. I think it was at State Farm this year. But yeah, you had Luke there, and then if I had to name 2 other candidates, I'd probably go Sam, but I don't think contact with Sam has been as much as it has been with Luke. Sam Cassell, sorry. Should definitely use last names in case people don't know. Sam Cassell, currently an NBA assistant with the Boston.
That was the one candidate you could have gotten away with without using the last name, but probably still just good rule of thumb to generally use.
And then Bucky McMillan at Samford, their current head coach, is probably the next person I would mention. Young guy, he plays what they call Bucky ball. It's a different system, does a good job. Former high school coach, who's done a really, really good job with Samford, has a good shot at making the NCAA tournament. I think the concern there, and it really isn't a concern if you're hiring a guy for 5 to 10 years, is that he very likely will be in the NCAA tournament. So when the portal opens and all the moves have to start being made, he's going to be coaching on a team for at least one weekend. I think the difference there is you can potentially hire another guy, whether it's Sam Cassell, Luke Laux, or another person who won't have NCAA tournament responsibilities, who can get in here and get out of the gate when they need to, because they're going to have to rebuild a team again for like the 3rd or 4th consecutive offseason. So, yeah.
did we talk about how much Buc-ee's sucks on here last week? Unless they want to sponsor the show, in that case, they're great.
We have very differing opinions on this. I'm not one of these people that like wears a shirt representing the place because I think it's that great. But I appreciate a good Buc-ee's. As a man who's been to a lot of bad gas stations in his life, I'll take a Buc-ee's every time.
Why?
At
You
least
can't just stop at like a racetrack or a
bathrooms
Wawa?
are always clean, extremely
racetrack and
clean.
Wawa
Plenty of available bathrooms too.
I mean, but like
the food options are aplenty. The candy options are phenomenal. And let's be honest, do I look like a man who says no to candy?
But you can get all of that. You can get candy. You can get a Reese's Pieces, a Reese's Cup.
The options to do stuff with your coffee are plenty. It's just it's
all mediocre.
There's a gas station on
mediocrity there, and you have to fight a giant crowd to do it and almost find the parking lot.
That's the biggest issue is the crowd. When I was in there, it was like a conveyor belt of people moving through everywhere.
You clearly do not have children and have not had to go to theme parks and make your way through crowds and guys.
That's exactly the point. On your way to go to a theme park and get stressed out, you're going to go to basically the theme park of bathrooms and gas stations.
When you go to Disney with two small children and have to dodge strollers, it will prepare you for those moments where you walk into Buc-ee's and you have to go get a pulled pork sandwich and a mercifully hot coffee that you can put some creamer
in. Mediocre coffee and shit-inducing barbecue. Yum. But if you want to sponsor us, Buc-ee's, I retract all of this. And I would see the value.
Brendan's just never coming back from that one experience. He almost had to have Greg carry him out of the store.
Greg, for people, our photographers, like 6'6", pretty close to it.
He's a large.
And I'm trying to follow him to the bathroom because it's not clearly marked. Because why would you know? I could not find the bathroom. It's possible. And I will. A moment of self-awareness. It's possible I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't identify where anything was, and it was just like spinning around me like the Mr. Krabs SpongeBob.
I think I came out of there and Brendan was sitting out of Buc-ee's, the entirety of Buc-ee's, after navigating it like the veteran I am, and finding Brendan sitting on the bumper of a car with his hands on his knees, hyperventilating.
I was crying. All right. Anyways, it's coming to Tallahassee. There's your free sponsorship or your free advertisement there, Buc-ee's. Does Buc-ee's do any business with anyone at 24/7 Sports? Like they don't do Paige Show, do they?
No, I
don't watch.
He has another, I think.
Okay. All right. I'm just making sure. We may have had to edit all that out. We're good. Okay. Football time, guys. FSU is in the midst of its winter workouts, tour of duty. They've been getting after it. They started doing it a little earlier than normal, meeting every Friday, and they've had a few two-a-days as well. And so it's in full swing. Spring practice starts almost in a month from now. Today's the 17th, and I think the 19th is when it starts. So, it's coming up pretty soon. It'll be our first look at this 2025 roster, and plenty of questions, 30-plus newcomers already. So there's going to be in a lot of it key positions, a lot of unknowns, and really, frankly, if I'm being just totally transparent, like based on last off-season viewing windows and stuff, like they can look big and athletic and stuff, but there's the unknown of how it all does during games and how aggressive you are and how tough you are. So we're gonna be looking at things this spring, like how physical are they? Do they change the way they practice and go about it? And there's gonna be things that we're gonna be trying to monitor and trying to do our jobs, I guess, a little differently. I think we can talk about all that as we get closer to spring. I think where I want to go with this episode is our off-season checklist that I put together. You guys kind of went over it with me and made sure it looked okay, and we were all kind of on the same page with it, or at least thought it was all reasonable, and the things that we wanted to see that we thought were reasonable for Florida State to go ahead and have what we would call a successful off-season, right? As best as we can judge it on paper here in February. So what would the process look like? What are things that they absolutely had to fix going into the offseason to give us some level of confidence of what Mike Norvell could do? So went through, did the 10 of them back when the offseason was beginning, went through and did in the written format, Knowles 24/7, the 10 checkpoints as well. About 3 or 4 into it, I started doing like numbered evals to it because a few people had requested it for more context. So scale of 1 to 10, basically 1 being like, nope, you didn't do that at all. 5 being like, yeah, well, maybe, and 10 being like, yep, nailed it. You hit a home run in that acquisition area or whatnot. So granted, caveat, some of this is still kind of, we're judging it still. We're still kind of processing it. Some of it is just, you still have some acquisitions to go, or it's too early to tell, but still, I think this will be instructive. So anyways, it's a long rambling. Let's get into it. The first one I have is checking in from our first point in November. Did FSU take steps towards reestablishing a culture of accountability among players and coaches alike? I did not put a number to this yet. My answer at the time was kind of. I thought for accountability. I thought in some areas, very much so. Some areas, maybe not so much. Chris, let's start the areas where we thought that the accountability was enforced.
Well, they got rid of some guys who were certainly issues in that regard. I think that's where it starts. I think the other thing there is just some messaging. And, Mike Norvell is on his booster tour, having made a couple stops in Jacksonville and Pensacola. Orlando and Pensacola. No offense, Jacksonville. I know you're later in the tour. And he's certainly talking that way. Edge is a word that we talked about last time we got together on a pod, but there's a degree of guys have to hold one another accountable. Their goal is to find leaders and define leaders, and leaders can be vocal or non-vocal by doing it in different manners, but it's got to be better on this football team this coming year. Do I think they've done it? I think it's way too early to say, yeah, they did it. I think that's one of those things that kind of shows itself on the 7th spring practice when guys don't really want to be there, who's basically telling them to get their asses in gear and go do their job and do it at a high level. And, you didn't do that drill. Well, go do that drill again. Stuff like that is more what's going to speak to that, in my opinion, than anything that we can see in the sense of the way people talk about it or what we perceive they're going to do.
When it comes to the retention of or not of certain players, what do you make of them retaining guys like a Conrad Hussey? Or Shaquem Brown?
I like that Chris volunteered at Exec.
Well, Hussey's a guy that I think has a high level of capability, but certainly hasn't done it. The attitude wasn't good last year, and the maturity did not shine through. I think there were a great deal of conversations had between them and specifically Mike Norvell. I don't think that's one where it was handed off to a position coach to make the decision. I think if a guy returned, it's because Mike Norvell felt comfortable enough to allow said guy to return. Now, that's a willing gamble on his part, but we have seen in this program guys take steps forward. Renardo Green changed as a human. Jerry Jones matured a great deal. There's other examples, but those are two that are very prevalent, clear-cut, both now playing on Sundays.
Quick aside there, CBS just did a story, I think 2 or 3 days ago, of a redraft of the first round of this past year's NFL draft based on how players performed as rookies. FSU had 4 defenders in that redraft, with Jarian Jones and Renardo Green making it, with obviously Braden Fisk and Jared Verse, who they had as the 4th overall pick. So it was a really, really good defense that probably deserved a chance to play in the college football playoff.
So to answer the question, it obviously falls on the shoulders of Norvell. He made those decisions. I think it will be interesting to see if they bear good fruit or if you get returns that are similar to what you had a season ago.
I had some concerns, Zach, that they were open to bringing back Marvin Jones Jr. and Pat Payton.
Yeah, and I think that's more to do with the new defensive staff because I think when a lot of coaches and at this level and in the pros, a lot of the mentality is I can make it work with these guys who maybe the past iteration of this staff wasn't able to get the most out of them. And obviously we know that Pat Payton and Marvin Jones have potential. And in Pat's case has showcased that at the college level at, a pretty high clip previously in his career. So I could see why, you look at those body types and think hey, if we can establish a new, culture defensively around here, maybe get them to lock in.
I know you're playing a theory where I would just express my concern real quick and let you have your point too, Zach, is we just lived through that. Mike Norvell talked about pretty openly this past weekend or last weekend, 2 weekends ago, I guess at this point, about potential and how they kind of banked on that a little bit too much. And it's are you going to go ahead and I would have concerns that you would be kind of re-inviting some of the same gambles that you took by bringing back players who didn't show high-end effort. So you can't have the talk about the edge and having desperation to you, and then I'm talking like a politician here with my thumbs, and then with the mentality, like you can't have both of those at odds with each other, I guess. And that's where I pump the brakes. It's like, you didn't end up bringing them back, so okay, but the fact that you're willing to makes me wonder how deep rooted the account, or under the right circumstances, how deep rooted the accountability really is going to be. Like, I'm still in the TPD phase of that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And to be clear, I was just bringing up the point of like why I think that was on the table for Florida State, but I don't agree with it. I think that whether those guys could bring value to you or not, like this past season happened, and when you have people not showing effort and directly impacting how awful 2024 was, like I don't think you need to relive that and try to like you said, once again, bank on potential. So yeah, I mean, I think the true way we'll judge this category is based on how we see these coaches interact with the players in spring and fall camp. And then obviously, if you look at it from the coaching staff standpoint, I think a lot of it has to do with recruiting, and that's like a cycle long evaluation. And obviously the most important data point for that is who are they landing, and we'll ultimately see what that looks like probably here in the summertime. But yeah, I mean, I talked to I think on the last podcast about the accountability in recruiting, specifically with Coach Norvell, and how that needed to be improved. And I think that's still something that I'd like to see more of. But yeah, I think this will be my grade would be TBD as well, just because I'd like to see it kind of all play out and evaluate, when there's more clear examples of accountability and whether or not that's happening.
I do not enjoy playing psychologist when it comes to football players, because some guys talk a good game and they just are athletically gifted enough to be the level of player they would desire to be. But I will say that when I listen to a Deontay McCray, a Deuce Robinson, conversations with Squirrel White, a focus on being a good football player, focus on a desire to kind of give it their all and prove their all and show their best, those are good things. And I do think they've done a good job with a chunk of the guys they're bringing in among the 31 that are already here, specifically, especially some of the transfers, that they got guys that sort of seem to have the right kind of DNA. And we know on film they can actually do stuff because there is production. In the case of a Squirrel, Deontay McCray has done it, albeit at Western Kentucky. I like that. Like, that is one thing I did like about when I look at his input output, the guys that you're getting rid of already output, and then the input is these guys you're bringing in. There's a degree with some of those guys where I feel like, yes, they probably replaced what they had, maybe with a lesser what they could be talent, but we know in these cases they're much better currently at what they do, and they seem to have the correct approach.
To Zach's point, before we jump on to the next point, which Chris kind of just jumped ahead to, which standards, how we do things around here. Yep, very much so. But I like the self-awareness. I do admire that. Tony White at the booster stop in Orlando 1.5 weekends ago. We'll just split the difference there because I can't keep track of things. He said you either go out and do them or you're not going to play, in regards to just execution, physicality, baseline things. Sounds great at a booster event. I like what Zach said. Like, I think ultimately where we kind of start seeing like where this new culture takes place, if it sets in, is kind of, are they changing up the depth chart rapidly? Are they allowing bad play, or poor effort more so, to kind of go unchecked for long stretches? I will say, like, I thought Adam Fuller was quicker to make, and it's easier to tell sometimes, effort on defense, but he was quicker to pull and change up the lineup, I thought, than other outfits were. It still took a few games, but we ended up seeing Conrad Hussey not playing it within the context of the defense. He was only on special teams towards the end of the year for the most part. So we did see some examples of that, but then you still had Marvin Jones Jr. like starting and playing a lot of snaps. we all saw it, I guess. I don't know. I'm not trying to be an ass.
What is point number 2 that I jumped ahead to?
Point number 2, and push back if you feel free, guys. Point number 2 is that FSU land a high floor transfer portal class. To me, this was a resounding yes. I thought this was
I think they definitely went with the Signetti idea of production over projection, which was a reversal from the prior year. So I guess that's a yes for me. I'd probably a 7 is where I land on a scale of 10.
I went 8 on it. Like I thought you landed pretty high floor guys across the board. Offensive line for sure.
Yeah, O-line, yes. You know what you're getting in your quarterback. He's played a ton of games. He has experience with the new OC. You added Randy Pittman, who literally comes from the system he's going into, and he was very good in it. We just talked about Deuce and Squirrel some on defense. It's a little bit more mixed bag on defense because a guy like Jason Jenkins is a projection, but there was a belief that he was ready to take the next step at Tennessee next year.
And there were 200 snaps that you got to see in the SEC in a scheme that might have some similar kind of philosophies too.
But like Elijah Herring's played a ton. Deontay McCray's produced it at a high level last year. Diamante Diggs has been in the college game for half an eternity, half a decade. So, those guys, yes, you know what you're getting essentially there with those. There's some other projections there. Caleb LaValle is another one that comes to mind who hasn't played a ton, but he did have that ball game, and you're hoping that he's going to build upon that. So, yeah, I think all in all, they certainly learned lessons of the prior portal cycle, I think it's fair to say.
I do too. That part is encouraging. Zach, what say you? Do you have a number to kind of help Chris and I get a nice round average here?
Yeah, I'll go 8. I mean, I think if you're going to characterize the portal haul, it's very much high floor. I think the biggest question is what that ceiling could be. And there are some high level players, especially offensively, that you added. But, I think you're looking at it holistically, and there's not a lot of guys that you're hoping, can do it, right? I think a lot of these guys have done it. It's just about, fitting them into your scheme more so. But yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to the floor, I think you raised your squad's floor a ton with this portal haul.
Did we want to put a number to the first topic, or did we find just kind of punting?
I mean, that's a TBD. I don't.
Yeah, shoulder shrug. We're just do it.
I'm healthily at a 4.
You know what? I was gonna say 5. Chris, we'll go with 4 since you were man enough to put a number to it. Yeah, I think we all have our skepticism.
Got to see it to believe it.
Fair. I think that's reasonable. Point number 3: did FSU land an ace recruiter on each side of the ball? I went with a 3 out of 10. I think there's some potential there. I know I got pushback from a good chunk of our Knowles 24/7 subscribers on this. You have some guys who I think have potential, and I'll let you too because you cover recruiting more than I do. I think you have potential for it, but I don't see like a surefire ace recruiter, someone who just came in and changed the landscape like that immediately, which is what I was taught. I think that's what an ace recruiter does, is they come in and there's a new sheriff in town. I didn't get quite that vibe just yet from anyone.
I got opinions on this, but I want Zach to go first since that's his baby.
I'm going to go check on the dogs, make sure they're not killing each other while you do this.
Yeah, I mean, early answer, I don't think so. When it depends on what you're characterizing as an ace recruiter. But I agree with Brendan in the sense that, like, an ace recruiter is someone that's going to come in and immediately you're going to notice a huge shift in the amount of quality prospects that are getting on campus, and then eventually, the ones you're landing at whatever position they're impacting the most. But I mean, you have some quality recruiters that you added to the staff, and I think two that come up a lot when doing interviews with recruits over these past 2 months is Herb Hand and Terrence Knighton are probably the two that come up the most. And obviously with the O-line and D-line, they're recruiting a higher clip of players at those positions, but a lot of those guys mention how they've formed strong relationships with those two specific coaches, and especially Herb Hand. I mean, he's built out a pretty extensive board on the O-line, and a lot of those relationships that he has date back to his time at UCF, and he's definitely the coach that has used the most of his previous standing relationships to help him now recruit players to FSU. There's some of that with Coach Knighton and also some of the other defensive staffers, but yeah, I mean, I don't think you added ace recruiters, if you want to call it that, but I think it's fair to say you upgraded specifically at certain positions, but ultimately, I mean, we're talking about like we're judging how they're forming relationships 2 months on the job, but ultimately we'll have to judge them based on who they're able to land. But yeah, Brendan, if you missed it, I said I didn't think they added any like ace recruiters, but I mentioned Herb Hand and Terrence Knighton in particular as two that were standouts when talking to recruiters.
There's nuance to this. Like you can add quality recruiters to the staff and them not be ace recruiters.
Who would you characterize, like just to give like perspective on this? Who would you characterize as an ace recruiter, like nationally?
Damian Craig certainly had a stretch of his career where he certainly fits that category. Wesley McGriff's a guy I think of back in the day where kids absolutely loved him. Joker Phillips, so he got in a little trouble for being an ace recruiter.
Chris Hampton, who was a finalist for the DC job, just was named
Chris Kiffin when he was at Ole Miss, but also got in some trouble for being an ace recruiter.
Well, that comes with the territory.
So there's a degree for me, like I think the idea of ace recruiter is sort of dead because the almighty dollar is the ace recruiter this day and age in college football. I think the more important thing with staffs is the ability to put yourself in position to close and to have the relationship that allows you to close. There were moments where previously here with the staff that certainly slipped, where the friendship was great, but the ability to have the chance at the end just wasn't good. And that's where they got to be better.
Does it recruiting matter more? Doesn't that like ace recruit? Like I don't
no.
First off, the almighty dollar, like okay, all right, no.
If a kid views 3 schools in a very similar manner, he's going to go to the one that gives him the best offer, right? I feel like that's a pretty fair assessment. Simplistic.
I mean, there's been examples of us covering it where they like the top dollar doesn't always win.
Right.
And
Braden Fisk chose FSU for less money than he was being offered by other options.
I talked to someone this past or a week and a half ago.
1.5
about like that specific topic, and they mentioned, I won't mention their recruit, but it was a recruiting battle between Texas and Oklahoma, and I guess Oklahoma had offered like high 6 figures to a player, and Texas had offered well into 7 figures, and that player chose to go to Oklahoma. And this is at a premium position. So like
that was 2 bad choices in one.
Yeah, I mean, but hey, I mean, he might have an excellent relationship with someone on staff at Oklahoma. To me, like, I think an issue that FSU fell into the past few seasons with the introduction of NIL was that a lot of times, like, they try to enter the playing field for a recruit too late. And wouldn't have that established relationship because, whatever reason, right? Communication fall off, which we've talked about, or a variety of other things that ultimately hurt them in the end when it came to trying to, fight an NIL battle because, you still need that baseline relationship, and those with better relationships with the prospects are ultimately, I think you're going to save money, right? Like you're not going to have to overspend as much if you're the staff that's forming the best relationships with these recruits.
Like Florida's an example of this, isn't like that's
why did FSU screw up last June before they went to on the field? Why did last June not work for FSU?
I don't think it was I don't think it's as black and white as, and I know where you're like they did not get a bunch of.
You're saying they went cheap.
Yeah, they entered June with an expectation price that was not the reality of the price.
They had a nice foundation.
All the recruiting in the world that they had done to June did not matter because they were not financially prepared to compete for the players they wanted to bring in that they brought in on official visits in June. And that ultimately, to me, speaks about the almighty dollar.
Doesn't that go back to an extent relationships, to where you enter the negotiation process
Maybe.
not sure of what the
maybe,
market is going to bear?
Yeah, maybe in those relationships, they need to be better at being more upfront about, so what's it going to cost to get you in an FSU uniform? But at the end of the day, it's still a financial transaction more
A
than
lot of the position coaches
recruiting
aren't allowed, or didn't. I shouldn't say not allowed. A lot of the position coaches didn't have numbers to talk about last cycle. I'm not sure how this cycle is going to work, but it was not filtered to them. It was up the ladder.
To the original question, I do agree with Zach wholeheartedly. I think Ken and Knight have both done an excellent job of expanding boards, building more bonds, building more relationships, working hard to get those kids on campus. Herb Hand's been phenomenal at it. So I do think that's positive. I think those are areas they've improved in their recruiting efforts.
I like Herb's
I don't think
energy.
that plays to ace recruiter necessarily, but it is an improvement in recruiting efforts. But I think the biggest mistake FSU made last year, beyond going 2-10 on the football field, which obviously has its ramifications for sure, is that they went into June with a plan of assembling a really good class, and they were not prepared to financially spend to assemble said class. And I don't know if we want to put that on coaches, if we want to put it on the GM, if we want to put it on the head coach, if we want to put it on the entire operation, which is probably a fair place to put it. But it was incorrectly done, and it set them up for failure where they didn't even have a high-level class to attempt to retain down the stretch as it was falling apart.
I think they were banking on them not being horrible on the field, right? No one was expecting one of the most drastic drop off in modern college football history.
Hope for the best and plan for the worst.
Yeah, I'm not defending the process necessarily. It's more explaining, I think, what had happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think
there's nuance to it.
I think at certain positions they definitely went cheap, and I think the most obvious is offensive tackle.
Offensive line,
yeah. I mean, that they had they had like 4 of the top offensive tackle prospects in the country take OBs, and 3 of them on one weekend, and they went over. And that was before the season started, when those guys were making decisions. So you can judge them independently of that. But yeah, I mean, they formed a really solid class. And I agree with you, Chris. They should have had a higher hit rate back on those summer OBs. But I just go back to think about the issues that we talked about with their recruiting aside from the money, right? Think about their DN board last summer and just how we all knew how it was going to play out.
Yeah, it was too selective again.
Yeah, FSU is not going to land Jared Smith. They were not going to land all these 5-star, 4-star players out of Alabama, and they should have went and took the kid out of Gainesville that
Nicholas Clayton's an example,
who ended up as a top 200 prospect. So to me, that's where my mind goes with the recruiting, and when you want to say hey, the NIL is an issue. It's you're probably not going to land these blue chip kids from Alabama or Louisiana that they always seem to find themselves in the top 5 for, but in the bottom half of that top 5. And to me, those are where the issues lie, and that's where you can see the impact of hey, someone that's not doing an excellent job setting up a board and developing relationships with recruits that are attainable, and that kind of skews the data a little bit, in my opinion. So yeah, to me, obviously money is important, right? You're not going to players aren't taking huge discounts to go to a school all the time because they have a better relationship. But I think if you're let's say this, everyone's offering the same price, and one school has that better relationship, that's probably where that player is going to go. So to me, yeah, I mean, that's kind of my thought on it.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think greater variety of options also allows you to set a better market from a financial standpoint. When you're limited options, they kind of got you by, for lack of a better term, by the balls, because they know I'm their dude. I can ask for a lot of money. There's a degree of that instead of playing the two against each other to some degree. And they do have to be better at all elements of that. I would go 5, very neutral on it. I think they hired some guys who are better recruiters than what they had. I don't think they hired an ace recruiter, but I think it's more about the philosophy of how they go about their recruiting than an individual who's just this unbelievable can go and attain anybody and everybody anywhere type of guy. I don't think that is as much of a thing as it was 10, 15 years ago.
A 3 for me, a 5 for Chris. Zach?
I'll go 4.
Split the difference. I like it. All right. Point number 4 here. I think this one should be pretty clear cut, but this was not a conversation that led to a lot of nuance on the board. Did FSU go ahead and add a quarterback with high-end mobility? One, explaining the need for it at the time when we set this list, we figured they were going to add an offensive coordinator who emphasized a running quarterback. At the time, we thought it was someone who was more in the go-go element, but they went and they go-goed in a different direction with Gus Malzahn, who also really likes running the quarterback, and he went and added someone who he actually recruited to play quarterback for him before. Tommy Castellanos comes to FSU after 2 years starting at Boston College. He was arguably the most dynamic rushing quarterback in the country in 2023. I think he had 1,000+ rushing yards. I think it was second nationally, only to Jaden Daniels. Maybe you've heard of him. Now, this past year, he had about, I think it was like 200 and change rushing yards. Scheme change, part of that, but the yard per carry changed quite a bit as well. Went from like 5 or 6 yards per carry to about 2 and change. I tried to look up his scramble yards. They actually got better this past year, so it does make me think that it was scheme related to an extent, but I went with an 8 out of 10.
I'm going with a 10 because Gus Malzahn is not going to coach him like Bill O'Brien.
I'll go with a 9, just, like with the context of what happened last season and how there was a drop-off. And, I think a 700-yard drop-off isn't only because of scheme, right? Like,
yeah, that's what I just thought. I can't dismiss that. Like, I think he's probably going to be a really good rusher. That's where the nuance. A difference between 8 and 10, I think it'll probably be good, but I'm with you, Zach.
Yeah.
We can't forget that happened. So anyways, we do think that he will probably be an effective running quarterback. I think we for sure agree that he has to be an effective running quarterback for this offense to go ahead and work. Now, another point that I had, I think this is number 5. All right. Did FSU evolve its front office? So the specific question and kind of putting this was, did FSU further expand its front office staff to fill an NFL model? This was done back in early February, so it was 2 weeks ago. I gave it an incomplete grade at the time because I want to see how they go ahead through the rest of the offseason and hiring. Right, but if I had to put a number on it right now, 3.
I don't feel like they did a whole lot to change it. I know they've tried to, improve some of the scouting element of it. I asked Mike Norvell about that during the Pensacola Booster stop. And they also hired, Josh Turner, CFO, who I think will financially impact it some. So I guess that is a significant move, at least from the sense of hopefully doing a better job at the financial side of pursuing players. But I feel like FSU is behind personally in regards to where some schools are going with that. I think of Michael Lombardi at UNC, who's going to wholeheartedly go with an NFL version of it. And I think that's where it's going to evolve to in the college football game. I think FSU is allowed to try to be aggressive and be in front of that. I don't think they're being that personally.
Yeah. I would go like a 2 or a 3. I mean, I think you mentioned the Josh Turner hire as CFO. But that's the entire athletic department, right? That's not just football.
Yeah, but I do think the hire, I think, has a lot to do with health settlement and how that's going to impact the way business is operated.
And most of your budget is going to go to football, so
for sure. But I don't like. Is that a hire that Mike Norvell has a personal hand in making? I don't know.
That'd be a good question to ask and to clarify. That's good. We'll dig on that, Zach. That's a good point. But he's not. Yeah. This isn't someone coming with an NFL cap background. He's been in college athletics, I think, through most of his career. Miami, came from Georgia Southern. So yeah.
Yeah. The only front office, other than Turner, the only other front office hire they made was Devin Rispris, right? As the
that we know of right now.
That evolved the old title of what Ryan Bartow had, but some differences to it, but that's essentially the 1-for-1.
But then I think a lot of the other, Adam Van Clay was a departure, Kewan Ratliff was a departure, and they didn't hire anyone yet to fill in those roles to our knowledge, right? I think so. I know that they made some promotions in house. I think DJ Daniels moved up to, I think it was director of recruiting strategy, and he's a former like walk on that has moved up the ranks in their front office staff and has done a nice job, helping in the recruiting realm. But no, I mean, I think we talked about how, I wrote about this too alongside Brendan, like it was important for them to start to adopt that NFL model. And, I thought an issue for them last year, speaking to Chris's earlier point, was their ability to negotiate. I thought that was a weakness for them at certain points of last cycle. And I thought that was an area where you could bring someone in who has, a business background or a sports business background and was able to help you in that department. And, they didn't make any of those types of hires. And they haven't yet, I should say. So that's why my grade is so low, just because I feel like you didn't really move your model in any, significant way to where, this is starting to look different than it did last year.
Yeah, with coaching, you bring in Gus Malzahn, former head coach. That's another strong brain in the room who's seen a lot, done a lot, experienced a lot. Rick Stockstill is a guy who's been a head coach. Things like that. You're always doing that in coaching, in the sense of adding as many smart people to the room as possible who have experience doing what the room demands.
Rick's not here anymore, though, is he?
He was still here as of end of January. I don't know that he's still definitely here. I know he was trying to get other jobs. I think he wants to get back on the field coaching. Like I think, for example, he had conversations with FAU. Is that where?
Maybe that's where I thought because I thought he was at FIU.
That's where Willie got hired, right? Former
FIU.
FAMU head coach, Tallahassee, Quincy product.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to fire him or say he moved on.
I know he talked about there, but I don't think that happened. I don't think he's landed some, so I think he is still here.
Okay, sorry.
But my point more so in that conversation is I don't think they've done that on the front office side, in the sense of I think it's fear in this day and age because it's evolving fast. When we get to the house settlement, it's going to very much become an NFL-like model. Everybody has said that. That's not some eureka thing I'm spitting out here. I think there's a degree of it's worth, if it's going to be like an NFL model, having more people that have experience with said NFL model. And I don't think they've done that. And I think that's where it needs to go.
So I went with a 3. Zach went with a 3-2. Chris?
I'll land at 3. That's fair. I do think there are smart people that are working in that. I just think it's a place where you're allowed to strengthen it, power it up, put more people in there who have experience, both from the financial standpoint of structuring things and just from the structuring of it, the scouting, the how do you construct a board, how you go about it, especially as it's going to become more and more about where do you spend your money versus where can we save because we're spending here. That's the NFL model. NFL teams are so constructed. We spend a ton of money here. We have to save money here. How do we do that? Old players versus young players, things like that.
And it's a place where you can add a lot of people, generally talented, smart people without a ton of money too at this point. I think that market's going to keep going up and up, but you can really bolster it and add how much is $1 million relatively? I know it's how much personnel does that buy you?
Yeah, nationally, we see a lot of schools being aggressive with trying to make new hires in that realm.
All right. Number 6, I did not put a number on this for myself because I hadn't started it yet at that point, but I got thoughts on this. Did FSU have a successful offseason? Underclass retention was mostly a win. How do you guys feel FSU did in keeping its underclassmen, which Mike Norvell said very adamantly multiple times throughout the season and towards the end of the year that the 2023 and 2024 classes he thought were cornerstones that he wanted to build on. How did they do in that regard? Zach, I'll start with you.
I think for the most part, good. Obviously, the one everyone's going to point to immediately is Luke Kromenhoek, and I think that is noteworthy, just because that was your 5-star blue chip quarterback that you brought in, the only one that Norvell has signed in his tenure, and after a season he's gone. I mean that hurts, just from the amount of time they put into recruiting him. So yeah, I mean, aside from that, I think of a guy like D.D. Holmes.
Yeah, that'd be the next one.
While that would have been a nice player to keep, we do know that Maryland, put forth like a pretty, expensive package for him, and something that would have been, tough to match for a guy that you probably can't factor into the rotation for at least another year or two.
I think there were also non-football circumstances there with regards to personal life, and nothing bad. Just it gets much closer to home, mom, things of that sort.
Yeah, that's fair. But he was like had the right body type, something that they've kind of lacked in their recruiting of defensive line prospects in the past few cycles. And I think, he's a young guy that you can kind of build on. But I'd probably give it like a 7. I mean, I with Luke, like there was a question as to his fit in this scheme. I think you could have made it work. I think he's a high enough level athlete to run Gus Malzahn's scheme. And, I don't think it's a only running quarterback situation, but with what, FSU is going to have to, pay him and Castellanos, because that move obviously happened around that time. I think it would have been unreasonable to pay that much to your quarterback room. So yeah, I mean, I think a 7 when it comes to, because I mean, you retained a good amount of young pieces that you can build around.
I feel the same way. The 2 guys you mentioned were the 2 guys that come to mind. There's really not a third one for me from a young standpoint that I felt they lost that they needed to keep. I don't know if I can include Destin Hill as a young guy because he's not really young at all.
He was a sophomore.
So yeah, I land around 6, 7. I'll put a true number. I'll go with 7 too, just to make it nice and simple. The quarterback situation is something that Brennan wrote about in October as things evolved, and then you throw in
some pushback for that, didn't we? At the time,
you throw in an offensive coordinator change combined with him bringing in a quarterback who he had experience with at a previous institution, and you can explain away why Croman Hawk left. Is it disappointing? Yes. Is he somebody you would prefer to keep because he is a good talent? Certainly. There's financials in it, which Zach referenced, but like it happened. So that is the thing that dings them. But beyond that, they really did a very good job. And we expected far more potential departures going into the offseason than actually occurred in that realm of the younger guys. Because that's the group that schools are trying to pick off. That's the invest, get them a little bit cheaper, believe you can develop them. The whole, if they come to me, they're going to be better than what they were there type of guys.
Once you went the route of a transfer quarterback, which I think you had to do, there was always a chance that you were going to lose one or the other of Brock or Luke, if not both. And then that chance existed even at that point when we wrote about it in early November too. Yeah, just that was the circumstances that had played out. You played both of them, which I think was smart. You had to see what you had, and it didn't really work. It didn't really work out for either because of circumstances and not necessarily all on either of those guys. So I think FSU managed it the way it had to, given the way everything played out during the season, and there was always going to be some shrapnel from that based on the circumstances. So it's not a hard critique, but it's still the facts is you spent a lot of time recruiting a blue chip talent at quarterback, and we'll see how Luke Kromenhoek develops. I know he was sacked a lot per drop back last year, I think more than anyone else in the country by far. Again, some of that's on him, some of that was on the situation. Does it get better at that? But that was the guy you want to keep around and see what you could have, develop with him. So I was going to go with an 8 because I thought just him alone dings it a couple points, but he did such a good job with everyone else. To your guys' point, I think this was a win generally for FSU. I just don't want to brush away the Luke Kromenhoek. So I'm fine with a 7. I think losing him and D.D. Holmes is enough to ding it a few points. Next up for us. All right. So did FSU hire a defensive coordinator who can immediately attract blue chip talent? Tony White comes in with a really high regarded background. I think 24/7 Sports did a story where they put him as a top 10 coordinator hire this offseason. Did a lot of impressive stuff at Syracuse, at Nebraska. I don't know yet if he's someone, again, part of this is early, but we did have the transfer portal cycle to kind of help us gauge that as well. Is Tony White someone who is going to immediately, infuse the roster with elite, highly coveted blue chip talent. I did TBD at the time. I'd probably go like a 5 right now, maybe 4. You did get some blue chip guys, but like the lack of Nebraska transfers, other than James Williams and Stefan Thompson. Go ahead, Zach. That's where I kind of have some skepticism.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that was the first ability to evaluate, what the immediate impact of bringing him on would be, right? Like the ability to attract all those Nebraska players that entered the portal around the time that it was rumored that Tony White was going to leave for FSU. And I think the general thought was like, oh, FSU is about to clean up and add all these, Nebraska defensive linemen, specifically, and some of the linebackers that entered. And yeah, I mean, Jamari Butler was the one that was you needed to land him. So that kind of dings the score for me a good amount, to not even get him in for a visit, just considering what FSU's need was from a pure like number standpoint on the D line. That was one that, not, I think, when I criticize this on the message boards, people are like, Jamari Butler wasn't super productive or anything at Nebraska. But like, he's capable and did it at a pretty high level this past season.
And they wanted him to come.
Yeah,
like that's,
and they
like
wanted
you got to start judging it on that.
He signed with LSU, so it's like, to me, like, that's where my issue is, right? Like, those are the ones you need to land. There are some recruits in the 26 class that have mentioned relationships with Tony White so far, and the Nebraska staff that came over to Florida State, but nothing like to the extent of like, like I mentioned before, like Herb Hand and his connections at UCF, or even Terrence Knighton having some pre-existing relationships from Nebraska. So, I'd probably go like a 5 or 4. I mean, you landed some pieces that are going to help you, especially James Williams this upcoming season, and hopefully he'll be able to attract some more talent. The one thing I will say is, like, I do think, relative to what you staffed before at that spot, like, I think that's an upgrade.
Yeah, but that's not the topic, and that's what people confuse that sometimes.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you're just judging based on him specifically, I'd go 4 or 5. I mean, I think he's I've talked to a few player or recruits and parents and stuff that have dealt with him so far, and all really good, positive reviews. So
he's super impressive at the coaching clinic and even the booster stops. I wasn't like, he's going to be a good recruiter. I was, the context for me again was immediate infusion of recruiting juice, and I think this might be more of a relationship builder type of guy if you're looking at the positive outlook there.
So another Nebraska guy would have been Prince Will, right? And they were a little bit mixed on the idea of bringing him, but talent-wise, he's good and obviously played for those guys. I think Tony's message is really good. Like, I think it resonates when a kid is in front of them and they speak to him, whether it's him going in the house or them on campus. I think the key there is, one, being able to get the front door open and or getting the kid on campus and getting him on campus repeatedly. I do think he is, to a degree, a relationship guy where, like, if you do spend time around Tony White, you seem to like him. Like, one, he seems sharp from a football standpoint. 2, he has a clear and concise message of what he wants to do and how he intends to go about doing it. And he works with enough guys who have experience working with him that they know exactly how he operates, which I think there's good to that. It's not like the whole machine's being taught new lessons. A lot of the machine understands how the machine operates. But it was not an immediate, like, mind-blowing infusion of talent. So it is a mixed bag from the question standpoint. I do think long-term that with some success on the football field, Tony White's going to recruit at a pretty good clip defensively, though.
So do we go? Zach and I were kind of in the 4 or 5 range. You think that's fair?
I'm a little bit higher because I'm wish casting, I guess, a little bit, hoping.
Don't you? No, we've got enough. I hate that. I hate that term. Hate it.
I know. I'm joking with you a little bit. I do believe he can be good at it. If we're going solely immediate, I guess I have to go around 6 at best.
Let's split the difference. We'll go 5 as a collective group here. But I understand the reasoning where you're coming from, Chris. This was more of a immediate, because we're looking, again, I set this whole thing up was the idea of like, is Mike Norvell going to be a permanent fixture at Florida State? Like, does he get this fixed?
I think one we're forgetting is Kevin Wynn. They did retain Kevin Wynn, which was
Odell and I think
Daryl Jackson came back, and there's elements to that, and a lot of people were involved in getting Daryl to stay. You know, I know his relationship with Corey Fuller mattered. His relationship with Devin mattered, for example. Beyond just the guys he's going to play for, I'm sure T Knight played a role, because I don't think Daryl stays for a guy that he doesn't want to play for. So, you know, there's that. But like, there were those. So those are wins I don't think we should just like whisk away, while also mentioning the misses like a Jamari and a Prince Will, for example. And by misses, I mean guys that some people just automatically drew the line of Nebraska to FSU that it would happen.
And they wanted those guys generally.
Yeah. Especially Jamari. Jamari was one that was disappointing because he never even stepped on campus. He was so quickly done to LSU.
Let's see. Okay, this should be pretty straightforward, clear cut. Did FSU overhaul the offensive line?
Yeah, that's I'll go with 10 with solely the concept of overhaul, because they went with a bunch of experienced guys who have defined positions. They actually recruited an actual real big tackle in Micah Pettis. Yeah, and you got what? 3 guys that have played 3 or more years, 4 guys that have played 2 or more years, I think, among the 5 in the sense of starting the entirety of seasons.
All at the Power 5 level, 2 of those guys in the
multiple
SEC
captains.
at tackle. I went with the 9 because new scheme. There's some unknowns to it, but like, yeah, you churned it pretty darn good. So
I think the one pushback we might get from people is that maybe they should have taken one more. And sure, that might be true, but I think there's a degree of it's not unlimited finances. Also, I think they believe Richie Leonard can be the 5th piece to that bunch.
As we sit here in February, I'm okay with you taking the 4 and Richie Leonard. And I thought Rizzy was solid. Like, I think he'll be a nice rotational guy. Like, I'm actually kind of optimistic about the offensive line. Now, I was last offseason as well. And I swear Darius Washington was kicking Josh Farmer's butt in preseason camp, and Josh Farmer is going to be a top 3 round pick. So yeah, it happened. Then it happened. So. Anyways, Zach, score for us, please, and we'll move along.
Didn't I already say?
No.
5.
Did your meds kick in? What?
5 for the O-line?
He hasn't listened to the entire topic.
No, I originally thought I had said 10, but yeah, I mean
What's happening?
He's messing with you, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I think he's disoriented. I think the flu meds have kicked in.
I mean, obviously, if you're just talking about the overhaul, they completely overhauled the O-line.
So a 10, I'm trying to move it. We're over an hour. What's the number?
10.
Is your mom going to scold me now and be like, you're mean to Zach on the podcast? Yep. Nice. All right. So you guys both went 10. We'll round it up to 10. Now moving on. Okay, I think this one we might stop and take a little time on. Did FSU purge the right pieces as it overhauled the roster? This kind of could go over to what our first topic was with the culture change. I went with a 7 out of 10 on this. I thought generally you moved on from guys who weren't going to be able to help you culturally in the way you wanted. But there are some players I was surprised who stayed. And transparently, Conrad Hussey was one. Jaylen Brown was another where his effort on field during games wasn't always great. TJ Ferguson was another who I thought cost you with some selfish penalties and showing tentativeness and maybe even loaf at times. So those are among the guys who were retained that they have talent, a lot of talent, a lot of upside. We will see if FSU can get more out of them. It wouldn't be the first time in Mike Norvell's career, but I was thinking major overhaul, and instead it seemed like significant overhaul, which there's some nuance there.
Yeah, Earl Little doesn't fit into that category because I don't think he was a detriment, but he obviously played poorly out of the gate. He got better as the year went on. But like in conversations I've had since the season concluded, Earl Little is a guy they still wholeheartedly believe in. I think their belief with Ferguson is that last year he dealt with a nasty elbow issue. Then later in the year, he had a lower leg injury. He got out of shape. It got bad and it got worse. I think there is a hope of sort of a reset, go be what we recruit you to be. But you can hope a lot, and it doesn't always turn out. The good news
Wish
is
casting.
the case. Well, the good news in the sense of Ferguson is while they brought him back, they didn't bring him back and say, hey, you're going to be our starting guard, essentially by their actions. They brought him back and then went and recruited over him. And if he wants to go and earn a spot, whether it's pushing Richie out or Adrian Medley out, he's going to have to go do it because those guys are clearly in the line ahead of him. They're in the queue ahead of him. Conrad Hussey knows that if it doesn't work, he's going to go sit over there on the bench because it happened to him last year. Jaylen Brown, same situation. There were instances of him sitting on the bench. So what I'm getting at is I think there's sort of an understanding with those guys of nothing is being handed to them. And there's also a degree if you run everybody off, I mean, how many new players can you bring in one single year and hope for any kind of carryover and success? They're going to have 39 new players as is. If you run off another half dozen, you're talking about 45 new players. Like at some point, you have to bet that at some point you were right about the eval and that you can still get something out of it.
I'll go with the 6 because I think you still retained, a number of players that were problems last year, but you did move on from some key ones that I think were absolute musts. So, yeah.
Okay. This is Zach texting me on the side saying he's got to be done in 15 minutes, and it comes immediately after he derailed it. So,
I'll go 7. I think they did a fairly good job of making a point in that regard. I think there's a limit to making that point. But it's an outward gamble on their part with some guys. There are some guys on the roster who have no reason to be on the roster because of anything they've done while wearing the colors that they wear on that roster.
Garnet and gold. I went with the 7, so we'll just round it up to 7. Finally, this should be pretty clear cut, I would think. Did FSU hire a proven play caller to hand the offense over to? 10 for me.
Yeah, I mean, I never felt like Mike was going to depart from the offense of what he has largely done here. Obviously Brennan Marion's name we talked about plenty, and while the go-go is different, there's elements that certainly came from the experience those two had together. He went different direction, hires a head coach who probably played a massive role in how Mike formulated his thought process of offensive play calling.
It was interesting that the two top, like the two people they went the furthest with in the conversations were both involved in his coaching tree. I guess Gus Malzahn's coaching tree.
It's his thing. I mean, Mike's always been an offensive play caller. He's always been a guy who believes in offense. You're not going to dramatically depart from it. I think for you to get there, it's like we have to hit it now and do it right, or I'm definitely out of here. And I don't think quite that's where FSU was with their head coach last year because of the financial situation. I also think Mike believes in Gus, and I think Gus is a guy who legitimately just wants to coach football. He's pretty outward about that comment, and I think it's very true. And it's going to be interesting to me. I think he's got enough elements of guys that understand what he does, Tommy Castellanos, Randy Pittman, so on and so forth, that it's going to be interesting to watch how it kind of takes quickly. And he's working with an O-line coach he worked with previously. So, yes, it's a 10 for me.
A 10.
But it was sort of the layup 10 when it became a reality that could be available because of the circumstances at Brendan's alma mater.
Go Knights. All right, so that is our cumulative, a 6.7. Or wait, a 67 out of 100 inside. It's 6.7 out of 10 would be the cumulative score. Which, guys, I feel like is extremely appropriate. I feel like they did some good things. Like, I think 2/3 of the way of like, yeah, I like a lot of what they did. I don't know if I could say I'm in love with the offseason. And I feel like the score kind of reflects how I feel. Hell, 6.7 might be a good over-under for wins this year, right? 6.5, right? I might just go with 6.5 wins.
I ain't touching a win-loss record till I watch the spring.
I ain't touching it until I watch a game in the season. Alabama. I'll let you know then. I like that we said I said 9 wins and it turned into being the 85 Bears. Like, I picked the under, guys. Don't know what you want from me.
Wishcaster.
Anyways, how do we feel about this exercise now that the dust has settled from it?
I feel good about it.
It was good to talk it out.
I like that we put the topics out there before it all began and happened. and then went and did it. Because it's not like, oh, we're going to talk about this because they went and did this. This was something that we truly believe needed to be done after watching 2-10 occur and knowing how college football is continually changing.
I think that's something I've focused on, Chris. This offseason is we kind of learned from what happened last year is I want to hold us more accountable too, and just like being able to put stuff out. We got some pushback like behind the scenes too from people at FSU of not saying some concerns earlier. And I was like, that's fair. So if I see something, I'm saying something now, and that's if it hurts feelings, like then it hurts. I don't want to. That's not who I am inherently, but like. I think we ultimately our obligation is to just be transparent, and it's always been be as transparent as we can be. Now it's just for me, just being transparent. Like, yeah.
I remember I thought and acted that same way directly after the 2023 National Signing Day, and our message board was not a fan of me being critical of things that I found issue with.
Well, people are. Generally, like there's always going to be some level of pushback when you're being critical, especially about something that people are passionate about and care deeply about. In this case, for us, we're covering Florida State, and our subscribers and listeners are Florida State fans and pay money out of their pocket to get Florida State news. And sometimes that's negative. They're not going to like it. I understand that. So it is always a balancing act. Doesn't mean we're going to be like hypercritical.
I want to avoid going overly negative solely because they're coming off of 2-10, because seasons feel independent of one another to a degree at this day and age. Obviously, there's things that got you to where you got to, both good and bad, in the time FSU's been under the guidance of Mike Norvell. I think the key for them is, obviously, like FSU desperately needs to be a competitive, good football team that wins more than it loses this coming season. For so many reasons, well beyond just on the football field.
Yeah. Financially for the athletic program would be one of those. And we feel it. Like we feel it in the way we're covering the pro. We see the people on the message board. Like
interest in recruiting is at an all-time low.
Yeah. And I don't think that's unique to just us, but I think we probably feel that squeeze. I think that's network wide. I think that's industry wide. I think that's the way the recruiting calendar and NIL. I think that's where that all has kind of converged into one. But
remember when high school recruiting became like January to December? Well, now it's January to June.
Mm-hmm.
Like vast majority of every blue chip kid we're going to deal with is going to be off the board basically at the end of June. After those officials, they may announce in July or August, but essentially the recruitment will be done in June outside of some negotiation down the stretch.
Last thing before we get out of here, Zach, why do you have the background blurred out? Is it people made fun of you for the butterflies?
No, I'm in a different space. Thanks.
I just want to see how long we can go before Zach said something. All right, we good?
Yeah,
we good. All right, this was fun and hopefully instructive, and yay, thumbs up. All right. For Chris Nee, for Zach Blossing, I'm Brendan Sinone. Thank you to our sponsors, the Turner Group, as well as Chattanooga Whiskey. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for your patronage, your support, etc. We'll talk to you guys later.